कौन सब क्या था? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to everyone. Once again, I'm Bilal Anwar, CEO of NDRMF. Welcome to all of you to our fifth webinar in the series. This is the last webinar for this particular series, and so many of you have actually stayed on in this journey in the last few months, and very active participation in all the webinars. So millions of thanks for that, for giving us such an experience and sharing your own experiences with us as well. These have actually given us a lot of excitement, incentive to carry on this exercise. So we are going to be launching another series of webinar, as well as we'll be transitioning ourselves and coming up with a number of other outreach and media activities, including some very focused structured talks as well. Today's webinar is about disaster risk management in Pakistan, challenges, lessons, and innovation. I wouldn't say it's almost like saying it's a cliche to say that we have an excellent list of speakers, but today I can say with a very high degree of confidence we have not an excellent but exceptional list of speakers. Given the topic and given that this is our last webinar in the series, we have actually put some extra effort, and thank you to my team here in NDRMF to bring together all these experts and who are truly experts, bringing a lot of experience and expertise in the field. Thank you very much to all the speakers for availing themselves for this session today. Without going too much, because we always short of time, and our webinars always overstep the time allocations. So I'm not going to be taking a lot of time. We have Mr. Maroof Ali Sayyed, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Center for Economic Research in Pakistan, very famous and some valuable and extremely exciting work which they're doing. So similarly, we have Mr. Ali Tokir Sheikh, no need for any introduction. One of those renewed expert in this field with a lot of international experience, and very actively engaged in a number of initiatives in Pakistan, as well as writing in the newspapers on these topics. Once again, we are very fortunate to have two ladies, both from Aga Khan, two different agencies, Aga Khan Foundation and Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, aka H, Ms. Farah and Ms. Nusrat Nasab, who of course are going to be giving us very practical experiences and expertise in the context of this particular flood which is going on in the country, as well as from their previous experience as well, because they have been active in the field for a number of years. Mr. Chris Sky, who's the country director for World Food Program and have been extremely active, WFP, in the floods, 2022 floods, and they have carried out one of those agencies which is at the forefront for undertaking the relief activities, and we have been actually very actively been engaged as well. So Mr. Chris is also going to give us some reflections from the ground. So let's move on to the first speaker, Mr. Maroof Ali Sayyed. Just a small announcement I want to make, which is I have another meeting which have not been able to avoid myself, so I will leave in around 30 minutes, but rest assured that I'm going to be leaving you in extremely capable hands, much more able than me, and who Mr. Fawad Hayat is going to be taking over the moderating responsibilities for me and take this webinar to its end. So can I request Maroof Ali Sayyed to open up the discussion, please?
Thank you, Bilal. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
Maroof, you need to unmute yourself. I think you're muted.
No, I'm unmuted.
It's
Can you
fine.
guys
We
hear
can hear you, please.
Okay,
Start.
great. So, first of all, thank you very much. This seems like a really great discussion, and I'm really happy to, kick off this webinar.
We can hear you,
I
Maruf. Just hold on.
First of all, thanks everyone. Thanks, Bilal. This is an excellent webinar series that you've put together, and really appreciate being part of this and kicking off this really important discussion. And kindly, if everyone can mute themselves if you're joining us late. But let me, do I have controls of the slide, or somebody will flip it for me?
We'll move the slides from here, Maruf.
All right, so, let me first, before we look at this slide, and I think a lot of people know that Pakistan has experienced unprecedented climate disaster in the last few weeks. A lot of times when disaster strikes, there is a level of uncertainty. Suddenly, systems, people, individuals are overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster. So if I look at this just torrential rain, you can see that, this is an unprecedented event. This is an unprecedented amount of rain that we see. If you look at Sindh itself, 471% more than the 30-year average, right? So if you move to the next slide, just wanted to, please move to the next slide, or make me a co-host and I can run this myself. All right, so the next slide is just, I just wanted to set the stage in terms of what we're dealing with, what kind of disaster we have. And I think a lot of people in the audience, as well as in the webinar and speakers, understand this magnitude. But this is a satellite image from March 24th and comparing it to August 28th, right? You see flooding everywhere. This community and communities all over Pakistan are completely facing a existential crisis, if you will. Next slide, please. In terms of economic and reconstruction costs, so there's been a lot of different estimates. I've chosen to show you Uzair Yunus and Amar Khan's work that they've been doing. It's part of the Atlantic Council's Pakistan Flood Project. But the fact of the matter is that you can see that there's severe amount of damage. Now, every estimate looks at different things, whether you're looking at if you're looking at basically house damages to buildings, crop damages, and other things. So basically, it's a tremendous amount of financial as well as non-financial damage to infrastructure, to lots of things. So this is really an estimate based on both damage to existing infrastructure and also the reconstruction cost. Now, what they have included in their estimate is also cost of actually providing some cash transfers to people who are affected first. So let's move on to the next slide. The fact of the matter is that a lot of these estimates, and a lot of estimates, whether you see from the government, whether it's 30 billion, it's 13 billion, or it's 9 billion, in terms of a lot of times this is somebody muted me. So basically, a lot of times these estimates are actually just looking at, infrastructure damage. They're looking at some of the obvious things. In any disaster response, we all know that it really starts from rescue, then relief, then rehabilitation, and then reconstruction or rebuilding. But I wanted to flag certain long-term costs. Long-term costs like education. I'll give you an example. SARP worked on this quite a bit, and now it's one of the most cited papers in terms of disaster. Looking at education, learning losses due to school closures, which is the fact today as well, right? So in earthquake in Pakistan, it was a 14-day event, but the learning losses lasted for, these are permanent losses that sometimes obviously when a disaster happens, your immediate response is rescue and relief. But very quickly, you have to start thinking about what are the most systemic costs that we would incur if we don't address them immediately. Another one is maternal health and child health, right? UNFPA has estimated that there are about 650,000 pregnant women in flood-affected areas right now. 73 to 75,000 of them actually gave birth right in September, right? So immense amount of challenge there because this food insecurity or malnutrition to women has a very high effect rate in terms of child's stunted growth, about 50% effect rate. In addition, you have lots of effect in terms of child health as well. Communities right now struggling to find food and shelter, and so this is a very important thing to consider. In addition, if you look at systemic challenges, I've put a lot of things up on the slide, but we really have to understand that in disaster response, we have certain systemic challenges in terms of data being in silos, not really, the costly part of it is it takes a lot of effort and time to actually data cleaning and collating. And a lot of times, I think the problem is that we don't take into account demand level heterogeneity. And so I'll talk about that in a second, but basically we do a lot of effort in terms of aggregating data, but the data sometimes is available publicly at a district level. In Pakistan, we know that districts are just very large, right? Millions of people, sometimes, for example, Lahore is 11 million people in a single district. So, there are about 160 districts in Pakistan. So that is too high of a disaggregation layer. So, and I'll talk about ECCE in a little bit, but Sindh in particular, 77% of kids in Pakistan don't have access to early childhood care and education services, but Sindh in particular is 84%, which is now even worse given the floods. So we can move on to the next slide. So how do we deal with these disasters, right? How do we deal with this immense amount of uncertainty that typically happens in a disaster? And अगर आप किसी mountainous region में जा रहे हो and you एकदम से बहुत सारी धुंध आ जाए and you can't see past that fog, what do? You don't step on the accelerator and just Allah Malek. You slow down, right? You slow down to go fast, which means that you have to slow down, learn fast, and आप usually अपने senses पे rely करते हैं, that analogy. So when you rely on those senses, what you're actually doing is you're collecting data. And so that is a very fundamental thing about uncertainty. You cannot just plow through uncertainty. You have to actually slow down to actually learn fast and do the right thing in terms of navigating that. challenge. So there are a lot of disasters right now. We're facing flood. Not too long ago, we were facing a global pandemic. And there are many such disasters, unfortunately, that we'll have to face in the future. Given the fact that climate change is fundamentally changing the way we live, the way we think about urban planning and other such things that are very fundamental to governance. We can move to the next slide. I wanted to give you a sense of, an example how we can take a structured approach. You can populate the whole slide. And I don't want to take a long time here because we have other speakers, but this is a framework that we use, which is a smart policy framework. And it takes a very structured approach, applying theory and data together, because data itself can sometimes overwhelm agencies. And as I said, sometimes we do a great job of doing an aggregation platform, but there are really 3 steps to actually creating a data responsive policy framework. Borrowing a bunch from engineering principles, but basically really looking at whether we're solving the right problem. How do we diagnose? How do we determine the intervention, and how do we test and refine, and especially iteration aspect. Keep going on the next slide, please. We can move on. So I wanted to borrow from an example from the global pandemic, because right now we are in different phases of this flood response. But I wanted to give you a sense for how this could look in a end-to-end cycle very quickly. I'm not going to use all the slides, so you can move on, please. This is an example. We had some very fundamental 3 questions that we were asking. Can we analyze COVID prevalence? Can we analyze mortality, morbidity? But as we started to look into it, and I'm just trying to give you a sense for a data responsive policy framework where we're working with stakeholders on the government side, primary and secondary health departments in various provinces. This is in the start and middle of the COVID pandemic. Can you go next slide, please? You start working and you may have certain hypotheses and certain data you want to collect, but very quickly it balloons into something much more, and starting to look at contact tracing, pooled. So this is a typical disaster response. You may start with 3 things and you end up with 9, and your system builds from there. Keep going. We can skip this, but this is just showing over a 2-year period how positivity rate change. But this is very typical graph that people have seen, so I don't want to spend time on this. Keep going, please. This is looking at demographic characteristics. Next slide. I'm going to move through some slides very quickly to make a single point, which is we started to look at private and public labs. So at a very aggregate level, you may think, oh, positivity rate is tarah hai and we should do this or that. But you have to actually ask deeper questions. What's happening in the system? You see that positivity rate is very different between public and private labs. Keep going. Next slide. Start looking at various, positivity rates across labs. You can go through the next slide. I want to. Yeah. And then looking at the test kits, we started to notice something, which was that different labs were using different test kits. And, your positivity rate could change dramatically based on that. You can go next slide, please. Next slide, yeah. So sample selection, we really had, no, previous slide. Next selection. Sample selection matters. How do you stratify the population? This is part of a data response policy framework. So looking at the flood, you have to really stratify the population. You have to figure out what population should be part of your sample. How should you methodically approach and then look at variation between those samples, variation between those places, whether it's a regional heterogeneity, maybe one district in Sindh versus South Punjab, or you're looking at demand level heterogeneity. Different communities may have different levels of resilience, right? And different levels of proximity to maybe ET distribution centers or government NDRMF centers. So that regional heterogeneity and sample selection based variation is an important thing. Keep going, next slide. We did a random sampling. You have to also pair admin data. So far we've been looking at administrative data, but we have to pair with a actual random selection or random sampling strategy to see or corroborate what you're seeing in the admin data. We can move to the next slide. Here, we actually looked at machine learning algorithms and actually adopted them for our analysis. And this is basically a couple of different algorithms that we have used in our contact tracing analysis. And one thing that you see is we could have actually saved resources in terms of testing. And so similar things in terms of, I'll talk about in the next slide. Keep going, please. And the idea was, I'm just going to spend 2 minutes on this slide, and this is fairly end of my discussion here. But basically, the algorithms and adopted them for our use to actually either save money, which is not deploy so many tests. In Pakistan's case, most of the contact tracing was actually happening using oropharyngeal test kits, whereas nasopharyngeal, where you put the swab in your nose, is far more sensitive. So, of course, the positivity rate was very low, but what the realization was that we could have actually stopped contact tracing by taking a sample of people from your contact list and figured out where from Port for Pakistan. I highlighted a couple of work in the beginning. Unfortunately, what happens is these interventions become very temporary. SERP itself was involved in earthquake response with the military, actually, because they were so, one of the biggest players at that time in the mountainous region. And we created an aggregation platform, but these platforms don't survive. I think what I am trying to say here is a call to action, and maybe on this platform, that our financial resources and our coordination resources have to go beyond, creating systems that will outlive whatever disaster we are currently in. So a lot of new data leverage can be leveraged. CDR data, which is called cell data record from telcos, and looking at crowdsourced data like Floodlight that we have on the Shahidi platform, and things like that. Some of the new data sets, and I showed you a satellite image. Not everything can be done today. A lot of our rural communities may not have network connectivity or very high smartphone penetration. So not everything can be used today, but specifically the first bullet in terms of satellite imagery, you can actually use fairly sophisticated deep learning algorithms that allow you to either use mixed methods or just satellite imagery alone to figure out the building damage assessment. So, and there's a lot of detail here, which I'm not going to go into, but we really have the next, aggregation layer. So of course we need to do aggregation, data aggregation, but that's where a lot of these interventions stop. We have to do aggregation and then coordination with third parties, with relief organizations outside of the government as well, to collect the same type of data. and coordinate so that we are not providing the same type of relief to the same community. And then we can also collect data to understand resilience across different disasters, and that allows us to ultimately, I will say that iteration is an important part, right? Learning from it is really critical. Taken as much time as I think with all the at the start we lost a few minutes, but hopefully this gives you a good sense for what a responsive policy could look like.
Hello.
Yeah, hello, Bilal.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Maruf Saab. Thank you for your presentation, and apologies for the background noise. Can I ask everyone to switch off their mics? But I think what is happening today is pretty unusual, actually. You highlighted some very, very important points, especially when you're collecting the data, the particular elements with regard to the sampling. Let's move to the next speaker. I'm extremely delighted to have Mr. Ali Toqeet Sheikh Saab, who is also the board member, but expertise in this particular area are very well known. So Sheikh Saab, can I ask you to start your presentation? And from this point onwards, I will request my colleague Fawad Khayyar to take over. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. And while developing my talking points, I was conscious of three elements. One is that I'm the board member, therefore I have to keep the NDRMF's mandate and direction of future work. And fourthly, I have to align it with my expertise. And in doing that, I first changed the topic a little bit. Instead of talking about disaster management in general, and as you'll see in my cover slide, I have restricted only to climate-triggered disaster management in Pakistan, the first slide. Therefore, I'll not reflect on non-climate related aspects. This is well known that the global temperature is a big threat, and we have not even approached 1.5 degrees, and it has cost us very heavily and dearly. And at 2 degrees, we will probably not be a viable state to exist. And therefore, 1.5 degrees is the benchmark we need to be conscious of. Thank you. Next. Since my topic is institutional responses, let me begin with the first institution in this regard as an NDMA. 4 points I wanted to highlight. NDMA's genesis is in era. It was abandoned. Now we don't hear about it anymore. If we go to disaster-prone areas that had an earthquake, you'll see that the same walls that had the cracks, they have been cemented. So it's not building back better, it's covering up the disaster and the vulnerability that we have. And second point is that the Hugo framework that NDMA has signed and Sendai agreement that it is pursuing these days commit Pakistan or NDMA to become more resilience oriented, but it awaits mainstreaming. NDMA has not taken upon itself to translate Hugo framework and Sendai agreement into Government of Pakistan policies, frameworks, and building standards, and so on and so forth. Next is the most important strength that NDMA repeatedly demonstrates is in having stocks for emergency and a supply chain. For this, they do coordination meetings also before every monsoon season. And this is a strength that comes to NDMA because of its close affiliation with the military, that is very good in undertaking relief operations, maintaining stocks and supply chains, and reviewing its coordination mechanisms. Because the NDMA heads are typically serving military officers, so this strength comes to NDMA quite naturally. The same level of strength does not exist in PDMAs when we go to the provinces. It has not been able to overcome several barriers. Relationships with the provinces is uneven, sometimes uncomfortable, and most district level TDMAs have not even been notified. So it is mostly an organization that exists only at the federal level. At the provincial level, in emergency, some working relationship is established, but there are no regular coordinating mechanisms that exist between NDMAs and PDMAs that help us prepare better for climate-triggered disasters. There are several challenges that it has. This country still does not have a recovery framework guide, which means automation, that when a disaster happens, who will do what and when and how. Pre-allocation of budgets, pre-allocation of resources, pre-allocation of determined roles, and understanding by everyone that who will be doing what is absolutely critical. And many countries have such frameworks that guide action afterwards. In this case, even when the mandates are clear, the ministries and departments argue with each other that who will take the lead and why. Likewise, multi-hazard vulnerability and resilience assessment methodology is not universal. It's not taken up by the provinces, and provinces are developing their own tools. I think NDMA has its own. They are way beyond their target of completing all districts by 2020, and we are into 2022 or 2023. They have not completed half of them as yet. But most important thing is that it's not how many districts you have built. Is it tested and used anywhere in the present crisis, for example, in this flood? And the answer, if someone from NDMA is sitting here, can offer us better one. I'll move to the next one. That's about the Ministry of Climate Change. Another one that deals with climate change and disasters. National Climate Change Policy has a section, and that has 20 high-level policy measures. They are very high level, and as far as I know, they have not changed from the initial version that was approved in 2013. So if there was any learning after 2010 floods, it's not reflected in this instance. And some of them are so high level that we don't know how to implement them. This section of climate change policy is about what to do at the high level, not how it will be done and who will do it. And these are, and how much would it cost? These are the questions that are still up in the air. And if I give you a very quick analysis of the present flooding that we have, most of the damage happened because of two things. One is that people choked river bodies and constructed hotels and housing societies and colonies there through encroachments. And the second was that the building standards were not upgraded, and people still live in the river-prone area, flood-prone areas with mud houses and kacha houses and not following any construction guidelines. Both of these two things, encroachment of river bodies and building standards, are not mentioned in those 25 principles, high-level principles given. Ministry also has a problem, I think, in multilateral environmental agreements. Many of those, such as dealing with biodiversity or dealing with desertification, are the disaster-prone areas where such disasters happen. And Paris Agreement and NDC, it takes lead, and we are far off in meeting our international obligations under Paris Agreement and NDC. In fact, with the present disaster, it has become even harder for us to honor our commitments because of change situation. I just want to quick light at a very quick level. Ministry of Climate Change is a successor of disaster management ministry and division that was established. Initially, there was a Ministry of Environment that was dissolved. The staff was transferred to planning, and in planning, a disaster management ministry was created, a division was created, and then that was dissolved in Ministry of Climate Change. But the rules of business, therefore, have tiers of responsibilities from the old environment days to DRR days, and yet many things are not clear in terms of its relationship with the planning or provincial P&D departments. It is not clear how it will operate and work with EPAs or SECP or Statistical Bureau of Pakistan or State Bank of Pakistan. These are some of the areas that now have made it absolutely critical for us to collaborate and cooperate in order to have clear databases and vulnerability mapping. Next. I'll move gears and take you to international level. That was my understanding about two institutions at a very high level, that in the present conversation of floods that we have, where we have lost $40 billion or something, or about 1,500 people and over 1 million livestock, and more than 1 million houses, I have tried to show you that how NDMA is able to work only on relief services, not on resilience. And the Ministry of Climate Change is still operating at a very high level with a very unclear mandate of cooperating and collaborating in the areas of disaster management and resilience in order to reduce climate vulnerability. Pakistan does not have direct access to climate change. Fawad is sitting here, who has previously worked with the Ministry of Climate Change as well on the finance unit in particular. Please bear me out that the only funding that government of Pakistan has secured directly is $25 million from RED+. All of the funding has been secured by the proponents of different projects, sometimes FAO or UNEP or somebody else. But as far as government's own capacity to develop proposals is concerned, in the Ministry of Agriculture or Health or NDMA at the national provincial levels, or planning or elsewhere, we have essentially outsourced this. And in fact, UNFCCC has two financial windows, GCF and Adaptation Fund. Sorry, it says AD, it should be AF. In both, we are not even applied for accreditation. We rely on intermediaries to write proposals for us, secure funding for us, and get us on board in the process or after getting our signatures on the dotted lines. So we are not on the steering when it comes to accessing GCF and Adaptation Fund. MDBs have more than $1 billion each portfolio in a country, a yearly portfolio in the country. I think World Bank has more than $12 billion and ADB has a similar one. And these are their typical lending windows. They have specialized, climate specialized windows where one can access concessional finance, where there is a leveraging of resources, where you have private sector engagement or hybrid financing options available. We have not even started on those. Just to give you an example, World Bank, for example, has CIF, Climate Investment Fund. Climate Investment Fund has dispersed 10 billion, $62 billion is expected, and it will leverage 25% of this amount from the private sector. Just to give you an example, and ADB likewise, has 5 or 6 specialized climate finance windows. In addition to what the bilaterals give through their JICAs or FCDOs and whatever, they are very large, very celebrated windows of financing. Germany has IKI, and UK has ICF, International Climate Finance. ICF, for example, is more than £5 billion window that focuses on energy, agriculture, food security, and resilience. We have not even accessed those. And these windows are also primarily available to us if we are interested in non-commercial rates in financing. But we have not applied to any of these 3 that I have shown you. There could be another 20, 30 that many of you will know better than I do. Therefore, as far as international climate finance is concerned, Pakistan is still passive, not proactive. We have not worked on direct access. In this realm, there's an uncoordinated effort happening. Several ministries and departments have tried to create their own cells and units for climate finance. Some of them have failed to draw lessons that why they have failed, and we try to set up the next ones, new ones, without necessarily thinking that how best we can succeed. We go further to the next slide. Connected with my first slide where I said 1.5 degrees is too much for us. Let alone, if you look at the higher side of the slide, that's the way the world is going. If you look towards the greener side, this is where we need to get 1.5 or 2 degrees. And our pledges are in red, and current policies, which are oftentimes vague, as I gave you example of a DRR from the National Climate Change Policy, are vague and imprecise, and they'll take us to 3.7 or 4 degrees temperature. So this is where the world is, and now I'm going to, in my next slide, I will try to translate this. Please move to the next one. To what the challenge is in the context of 1.5 degrees, where NDRMF has a role to play. There are 7 trends in climate change, extreme events. You know, many of them, all of us have experienced all of these. You close your eye for a moment and think of the province of the district that you come from, and you'll see that you'll have not just one, but many of them. Each district in Pakistan is prone to have 2 or 3 or 4 of these extreme events. And they're recurrent in Pakistan. On a given day, we can have a given month or a week, we can have droughts and floods. We can have heat waves and epidemics, and so on and so forth. You can do an audit of Government of Pakistan spending, or you can do an audit of your own NDRMF or any other organization's portal. Most critical one, which one is the most expensive one in economic terms, and which one is the most expensive one in terms of economic development or human well-being. And then you see which organization is doing what on any one of them. All of them are self-explanatory. I'll not take your time, but the climate-induced migration, the number 5, is increasing, and there are emerging hubs of climate refugees in the vicinity of just about every country. We have attracted some from Rohingyas and from Afghanistan and Barako and Peshawar, but I think this is a very dynamic area that requires a lot of research. Next. But this is my first of 2 slides. इसको सारे को दिखा लीजिए जल्दी से. जो ज्यादा important चीज है वो ये losses नहीं है. The extreme event is a result of something bigger, and the slow onset is something bigger. That's at the system level. Unless we address these slow onset events, those events will keep happening. In fact, they'll accelerate and they'll become even more serious. यहाँ पे जो चीज जो हमारे अंडरस्टैंड करने की है, इसमें से एक डब्बे को आप थोड़ा सा तवज्जो के साथ पढ़ सकते हैं. Whichever you like, you can focus on that. in terms of your personal or institutional focuses, but you see that the new trends that are emerging are extremely critical. For example, if monsoon is going to new areas like Swat and Chitral, Chitral is not a typical monsoon area. For example, heat waves in upper Indus Basin result in downstream flooding and disasters as it happened in Gilgit and Baltistan this year. And it is changing our agricultural zones. Heat waves in Afghanistan give us early water that 8 districts in Sindh are using for rice cultivation. So in that sense, each one of them has very big system level implications for us. And I want to leave it here. And the purpose is very simple. Oftentimes, we are told that Pakistan is a developing country, we should focus on adaptation, not mitigation. And that's where we will want to seek financing. But what is important for us to understand is that look at the red figures and look at their meaning for us. Their meaning is huge. पहली बात तो ये है कि जी agriculture is a bigger contributor to Pakistan's emissions than industry. और उसमें जो areas हैं जिन पे products बनने की जरूरत है, investment जाने की जरूरत है, उसमें livestock, land zoning, soil management and rice cultivation जिसका भी मैंने जिक्र, इस किस्म की चीजें हैं. They are causing more emissions than energy directly. It's not easy, मगर जो important चीज है हमारे करने की कि हमारे जो emissions में increase है वो 170% increase हुई है 1994 से 2018 तक. 170% is probably Marusa will tell us that is it much more than the population increase, it's much more than the economic growth rate, it's much more than anything else. And in fact, this is alarming rate of energy inefficiency, which adds to the cost of doing business and the cost of living for people. वही लोग थोड़ी सी इनकम के साथ या बिजली का बिल दे देंगे अपनी बेटी को पढ़ा ले तो 170% इंक्रीज को देखने का ये तरीका है. और जो प्रोजेक्टेड इंक्रीज है टू 2030 जो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ पाकिस्तान ने सबमिट की है वो 300% है. अब 300% अगर इंक्रीज हो रही हो पाकिस्तान के मिशन में तो हमारी कॉस्ट ऑफ लिविंग बहुत बढ़ जाती है. और जो पॉवर्टी के लोग पुश होते हैं वो बहुत ज्यादा बढ़, और जितने वो पुश होते हैं पॉवर्टी की तरफ उतनी उनकी क्लाइमेट वल्नरेबिलिटी बढ़ती है, उतने इस किस्म के डिजास्टर्स में जब भी हमने देखे हैं हमारे लॉसेस ज्यादा बढ़ते हैं. तो इस स्लाइड को दिखाने का मकसद ये है कि बहुत सारे इंस्टीट्यूशन सच एज आई वुड लाइक टू थिंक दैट NDRMF अपने पोर्टफोलियो को इसके साथ अलाइन कर सकते हैं कि लॉन्ग टर्म क्या हमारी इकोनॉमी को और वेलबींग को फर्क पड़ सकता है. नेक्स्ट. इसमें से हमारी प्रोग्रामिंग की ऑप्शन बनती. अगली स्लाइड पे आइएगा. इसको पूरे को पुश कर दीजिए जरा. दिस इज सॉरी पिछली स्लाइड पे जाइएगा. पिछली स्लाइड पे मेरे ख्याल है एक मिस किए हैं जो मेरे एक्सपीरियंस में बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, जिनको हमारा मुल्क इग्नोर करता है. इसलिए मैंने SECP, स्टेट बैंक, स्टैटिस्टिकल ब्यूरो वगैरह का शुरू में जिक्र किया था. हमारे पास किसी चीज की बेसलाइन नहीं है और डेटा सेट्स नहीं है. अभी मारूफ साहब ने जिक्र किया था एल्गोरिथम का. क्लाइमेट चेंज की मॉडलिंग आपको बतला सकती है कि 2023 में हीट वेव्स कितनी होंगी और बीट की क्रॉप फेल होगी कि ज्यादा होगी. उसकी बेसिस पे इंश्योरेंस निकल रही है, उसकी बेसिस पे हेजिंग हो रही है, इंटरनेशनल कमोडिटीज की प्राइसेस हो रही हैं. तो मॉडलिंग हैज बिकम अ वेरी प्रिसाइज टूल इन क्लाइमेट चेंज ऑन मोस्ट ऑफ द एक्सट्रीम इवेंट्स. डॉट्स पे भी ऐसे है, हीट वेव्स पे भी है, एंड सो ऑन एंड सो फोर्थ. मगर हमारे यहाँ बेसलाइन किसी चीज की नहीं है. अभी मैं पूछूं पिछले साल राइस की कीमत क्या थी तो मेरा ख्याल आधा मुल्क, आधी मिनिस्ट्रियां 2 दिन लगा देंगी ढूंढने में कि कहाँ पे. वेराज ऐसी चीजें हमारे पास बड़ी आसानी के साथ. हमने क्लाइमेट सर्विसेज को ऑपरेशनलाइज नहीं किया. हालांकि इतना खूबसूरत इतना बड़ा अब एक प्रोजेक्ट पाकिस्तान में इस वक्त चल रहा है हाइड्रोमेट का, और जो इंस्टीट्यूशंस डील करते हैं क्लाइमेट सर्विसेज के साथ, जिसमें GCISC हो सकता है, स्पार्को हो सकता है, PMD हो सकता है, नस्ट यूनिवर्सिटी और भी होंगे जो ऐसी चीजों क्लाइमेट सर्विसेज के साथ डील कर रहे हैं, उनको बुला के आपने एक छोटी सी सिलिकॉन वैली ऑफ सॉर्ट्स आपने क्रिएट करनी थी फर्स्ट एनर्जी, ताकि आप क्लाइमेट सर्विसेज को, अगर गवर्नमेंट बहुत ज्यादा फ्रेगमेंटेड है, डिपार्टमेंट्स में डिवाइडेड है, मिनिस्ट्री और डिपार्टमेंट्स, हमने सारे जितने पैसे थे हमारे पास उठा के डिस्क के थ्रू हमने कैश डिस्पर्समेंट में दे दिए, समथिंग दैट डिस्क ट्रांसफर वुड हैव डन फॉर अस। वो सेक्टर हमारा इज टोटली अंडर डेवलप्ड, प्रॉब्ली 1% से कम उनकी पेनिट्रेशन है, उसके कुछ बैरियर्स होंगे, उनको स्टडी करके रिमूव करने की जरूरत है। क्लाइमेट इंड्यूस्ड डिजास्टर्स need to have risk transfer mechanisms. We cannot waste our money the way we do through BISP. जब BISP के थ्रू करते हैं तो आप सिर्फ पूरे लोगों के पास जाते हैं, लाजमी नहीं है कि वो कोइंसाइड करते हैं, वो आपका डिजास्टर का 40% का 60% का नहीं पता चलता। At the same time, I think we need to have additional databases, another special purpose vehicle, जिसका पर्पस ये हो कि हम, it is about co-benefits. Every project and every activity will give us co-benefits, and this is how we need to think. We need to come out of this old thinking of adaptation or mitigation. Next and final slide. This is fragmented भी हो सकती है, इसलिए जब अच्छा काम भी करते हैं ज्यादा इफेक्टिव नहीं होता। हमारी केस स्टडी जाके ग्लोबल केस स्टडीज नहीं बनती हैं, हमारी जो फेलियर्स या डिजास्टर्स होते हैं उनमें से हम लेसन्स ड्रॉ नहीं करते, और ऑफन टाइम्स पॉलिसी वहां की वहां पड़ी रहती है। अगर क्लाइमेट चेंज की पॉलिसी है तो मे बी एग्रीकल्चर डिपार्टमेंट में उसमें किसी ने पढ़ के भी ना देखा हो और प्लानिंग में ना देखा हो। तो हमें बहुत ज्यादा जरूरत है कि अपनी रेजिलियंस रिलेटेड कन्वर्सेशंस को पॉलिसी प्लानिंग के साथ और ग्लोबल डिस्कोर्स के साथ अटैच करें, कनेक्ट करें, अलाइन करें। इफ इट इज नॉट, दे विल नॉट सिक्योर इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंस। इफ दे आर नॉट, विल नॉट बी वेरी इफेक्टिव एज इंस्टीट्यूशंस। और दूसरी चीज ये है, ये आउटसोर्स करना जो होता है ना, वी कैन नेवर आउटसोर्स थिंकिंग। थिंकिंग हमें करने की जरूरत होती है। आप सर्विस डिलीवरी को आउटसोर्स कर सकते हैं, थिंकिंग को नहीं कर सकते। प्रपोजल डेवलपमेंट इज थिंकिंग, ये गवर्नमेंट ऑफ पाकिस्तान की खुद करने की है, उसके हर डिपार्टमेंट के खुद करने की है। मैंने यहाँ पे नहीं कहा, मगर मैंने किसी और जगह पे मैंने एक पॉलिसी ब्रीफ में कहा कि पाकिस्तान शुड फेज आउट और put CDWP on hold, freeze it। पहले 1000 से हम 500 मिलियन पे उसका पोर्टफोलियो आ गया था, अब पता चला कि कैश डिस्पर्समेंट के बाद हमारे पास 500 मिलियन भी नहीं बचा। तो मैं ये पेश खिदमत करना चाहता हूँ, नो मोर CDWPs, बिकॉज CDWP ने हमें मॉन्यूमेंट्स ऑफ मैल अडेप्टेशन दिए हैं। हमारे अक्सर प्रोजेक्ट जो है हम हमारी वल्नरेबिलिटी में इजाफा करते हैं, क्योंकि उनकी क्लाइमेट प्रूफिंग नहीं आप करते। वो एक अलग टॉपिक है, मगर जब आप CDWP को जब आप होल्ड पे करते हैं तो इसका ये मतलब नहीं होता कि हमें डेवलपमेंट की जरूरत नहीं है। उसका मतलब ये है कि जिस डिपार्टमेंट ने को प्रोजेक्ट करना है अपनी प्रपोजल लिखें और इंटरनेशनल पार्टनरशिप्स करे, इंटरनेशनल अलाइनमेंट्स करे, इंटरनेशनल बिडिंग करे और अपने पैसे खुद लेकर आए। और बहुत दफा 2-3 डिपार्टमेंट्स या मिनिस्ट्रीज टीम अप भी कर सकते हैं। वी विल लर्न एज वी गो, बट द पॉइंट हैज टू बी मेड वेरी स्ट्रांगली कि जो सरकारी पैसे अब नहीं है, जिसके साथ आप जो है प्रोजेक्ट लेके आते रहे और बनते रहे, और 6 ट्रिलियन रुपीस का हमारा थ्रो फॉरवर्ड है। 1500 से ज्यादा हमारे अनफिनिश्ड प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, 1500 अनफिनिश्ड प्रोजेक्ट। एवरी थ्रो फॉरवर्ड एंड एवरी अनफिनिश्ड प्रोजेक्ट मीन 20-30-40% कॉस्ट एस्केलेशन। दिस इज नॉट अ बैटल वी कैन विन। जितना हम उस रास्ते पे चलते जाएंगे हमारी क्लाइमेट वल्नरेबिलिटी बढ़ती जाएगी। यही तरीका मेरी अकल ये समझ में आता है, हाँ वो एग्रीकल्चर डिपार्टमेंट हो, हाँ वो पता नहीं कोई और हो, आपको पैसे चाहिए प्रोजेक्ट्स करने हैं तो जाए सबमिट करें और लेकर आए। और गवर्नमेंट के डिपार्टमेंट्स NDRMF वगैरह उनकी सपोर्ट कर सकते हो, टेक्निकल असिस्टेंस कर सकते हो, अपनी सिलिकॉन वैली ऑफ क्या उसे कहते हैं क्लाइमेट सर्विसेज डेवलप कर सकते हैं। बट वी नीड टू एक्सेस कंसेशनल लोन्स और ग्रांट्स or leverage investments from other institutions and see how best we can have low-cost money coming to our country, not the high cost that we are presently doing. I want to thank you all for your patience, and thank you for giving me this time.
So thank you so much, Sheikh Sahab. I think wonderful, and a lot of questions जो आपने किए. Just a quick overlap, और फिर we move to the next participant for their presentation. Before we actually go to the question answer sessions, I'm pretty sure कि जितने points को आज आपने touch किया है, इस पे एक अच्छी debate और question answers काफी चलेंगे. Starting with climate triggered disasters, institutional responses, फिर NDMA, PDMA की चीजें, no recovery framework guidance. मेरे ख्याल है बहुत important सवाल है, discussion में जाएगा कि pre allocation of resources नहीं होते, और अभी भी हमने यही देखा है, especially as board director भी आपने देखा NDRMF का कि जो पैसे हैं वो divert करने पड़ते हैं, वो इसीलिए क्योंकि guidance नहीं है. Mandate होने के बावजूद भी who takes the lead, that still remains absent right there. You rightly mentioned अपने accredited entities और उन पैसों का जिक्र किया. I think we will go to the discussions after we listen to the other. But thank you so much, Sheikh Saab. और इसके बाद question answers में I think we will require a lot of support from your side. I would now like to request Ms. Farah. She's joined us. She's the Director of Partnerships for the Aga Khan Foundation in Pakistan. She's going to be talking about innovative and multi-stakeholder partnerships needed to tackle climate-related disasters. Farah, I hope you can hear me, and over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me too. I'm just trying to share the presentation in a slide mode, and somehow it's not picking up, I think, on your screen. Can you see it in presentation mode, or can you see it in full screen?
इसको presentation mode कर दें जी. Farah, it's not in the presentation mode. It's not the slideshow. It's the PPT which is open right now.
Okay.
I think yes. Now we've moved on to that one. We're good here.
Now we're good? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll try to keep it brief because, in fact, we have heard already quite a lot of inputs that we hope that our presentation together can sort of encapsulate and bring together in terms of what it looks like in reality on the ground, and how we can bring different experiences to make it work together, particularly with the scope of challenges that we're currently dealing with. I think if we look into our current way of thinking around climate change disasters, I think the key sort of element that we should start structuring around is really moving from reactive to proactive.
Example here. That is how often.
So when we shift from reactive to proactive, it means that we can't, each time we're facing a disaster was bigger than the last one, but we could have not anticipated it. There are how much we're generally going to be able to respond to on the ground, and what can we generally anticipate. But one thing that is very sure is that Pakistan has a long history of disasters, and climate change has not started to show up today or with this current flood crisis. But the coping mechanisms are very limited, and that is at different level of actors, including in our own sector as NGO sectors. We need to learn better from that aspect. The hacker can leave us alone for a little bit, but we talked a lot about institutional mechanisms, so we need to continue working closely with the government. And I just want to kind of meet the point that Mr. Ali was sharing. It's very important that we build capacity and at different level. And I agree with his assessment that on the ground at the district level, we are really seeing fragility of certain institutional position. Whether we're talking about the natural disaster risk management capacities, whether we're talking about what does the Ministry of Climate Change would mean, who is genuinely representing these institutions, and then gathering to respond to the challenges on the ground. The other element is that, I mean, who does climate change belong to? And the reality is that climate change is sector agnostic. I mean, we can have certain dedicated institutions, we can have certain dedicated capacities, but it's very important now to start gathering widely and create different level of ownerships across sectors. So right now, for instance, what we are seeing is that it's impossible not to work with the health sector on disaster preparedness, disaster response, and really like resilience. It's impossible not to work with the education sector. Otherwise, we will face like a continuous loss of development gains and continuous losses of progress. So it's very important that we think about what does this multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral kind of partnership when it comes to climate change challenges, how will it look like now that we're learning from this extremely challenging current situation? I think a lot has already said on protecting, and I think there's adaptation, there's mitigation, but we need to really make these investments and create incentives for these bringing different investors, different resources for financing. Then I think that's something that we should start focusing on. But the return on these investments will be undeniable. And in fact, right now, what we are seeing as well is the limitation of aid effectiveness, and in fact, considerable losses of investment made around the last decade in just one major disaster event. When we are looking into reconstruction as well, it's important that to think ahead. When we are going to start to reconstruct, we have to build greener. The reality is that we can't continue in the building and construction sector with the sort of solutions that we have, and I hope that Mustak can tell a bit more about what other effective solution can look like. Then at the community level, they are the prime target. They are the prime sort of like duty bearer, and it's very important to empower and promote self-resilience. That means giving the capacity to actually save lives. And we'll talk a bit more about that. That means giving the capacity to have more resilient livelihoods. But at this level, the investment to bring the communities on board and give a central stage also in the resilience area. So shifting from that, I think I will just share like a few key lessons we've had from this current flood response. I mean, the one thing kind of links to my last point. What we've seen on the ground is that very and sort of like deployment at community level. We can see that with minimal like kind of human capacity investment, you can do quite a lot in terms of saving lives. And in our own experience, evacuation, for instance, really empowering these communities to be able to like have information on so having information through early warning systems, and then have the capacity to act on it, that is particularly important. I think also spurring innovation and engaging the private sector. You will see in the middle this NHI, which is the National Health Incubator. This is a modality that we have helped set up in partnership with the government, with the Aga Khan University, and with a program called Accelerate Prosperity, which is in fact working as an incubator and accelerator of enterprises, startups. So during the COVID response, for instance, this had a critical role in sort of like bringing private sector solutions to respond to the challenge of COVID-19. That went from sort of printing like 3D nose swabs to be able to deal with the scope of testing. So there are ways that we can also incubate and accelerate important private sector-led solutions, including from smaller enterprises that can support response. And right now we're exploring different ways of doing that, including on like sustainable construction and in the shelter and prefab sort of sector. So that's really also something that is interesting and brings different resources on the ground. The second part is really when we look at these parallel sector to disaster risk, and I made the point around health, and I think everyone will recognize that, considering that there is a kind of huge health crisis looming as a post-flood impact. I think being able to bring capacity and rapidly like create innovative and creative options for response is also important. Like here we have to put a few things on screen, but essentially this is this master class for flood disaster treatment. In fact, you can build capacity in emergency as well, and that we need to also invest in these mechanisms of how we're going to support government in various sectors when we are facing this scale of disaster. So just like few lessons. I will just end my part on this. Who can play a part? I would say, quite frankly, everyone can play a part. And with the scope of what we are facing, we're going to need to bring more and more people together, more and more different assets, expertise, technical expertise, financial expertise, government actors, communities, private sector. So I think that really is something that is going to require also like a muscle of coordination and a muscle of sort of like of synergies. Right now, what we're seeing, and there's a lot of overlapping, there is a lot of additionality is not necessarily something that we are able in a state of emergency to secure, but additionality of partnerships when we design a more proactive like sort of programming is something we can do, and that's something we should endeavor to do. Who can bring what to the table? In this, I will kind of join back again previous presentation when it comes to investing and resourcing the needs. And I think here we are obviously often reliant on more traditional sources of financing, but it's extremely important to think more creatively about that. Climate financing is going to be critical. Impact investors are also going to be critical in the sense of like we need to draw more accountability of where the money is going and what it is achieving on the ground. Financial institutions have a role to play, even if it's investing and creating like kind of climate finance for green enterprises that can actually support the climate resilience or then disaster preparedness on the ground. When it comes to government actors, I've talked about it a bit before, but like I think getting into this multi-sectoral approach to the challenges we are facing is important. How we're going to do that, who is going to take the lead, is a bit of a question mark that we should start looking into like more seriously. With the government, I think the private sector can also play a role, even in public-private partnerships. We have several public-private partnerships, for instance, in the clean energy sector and in the health sector. So how can these type of like partnerships and bringing different resources together can really like meet the objectives on the ground? So on this, I'll kind of hand over to Nusrat to tell us a bit more from concrete examples and what that can look like.
Thank you, Farah. So here we come with what are the opportunities or how we can make that innovative and stronger partnership. Thank you, NDRMF, for giving us this opportunity, and the previous presenters have really set the stage, be it an institutional setup or how the data can really play a key role, and then who are the actors and how we can come together. So it goes with like how we can build a strategic partnership, and of course for that the climate coalition is a key, because here we more talk about like how different expertise could come together and do this partnership and provide a meaningful solution, a climate smart solution, as we say. The sustainability and the cost effectiveness, whenever we are thinking of an investment, how efficient and smart climate financing it could be it in the form of forecast-based financing or be it a risk transfer approach in terms of micro insurance. Then it more comes to the connectedness and how we can influence not only at the institutional level but also at the community level, how practical solutions we provide and how we can influence at the in the form of raising awareness or with evidence how effective it could be. as we rely on, when we talk about climate change, there are, models. It's kind of like predicting the future. It talks about scenarios. How we translate that result into an action, or how we communicate from a scientific or a jargon to more local general knowledge for a practical solution. And then when we talk about innovation, first thing comes in mind is about, or maybe there is only scientific, but it is a combination of a scientific and indigenous knowledge and a well-tested, I would say, local solution. So when we talk about like how we do it as an institution, and there are others who may use these kind of programmatic approach. So the best way is there are particularly monitoring of variation, or there are key indicators where you have to monitor the climate pattern. Then as we work with the settlements or villages, you see apparently certain hazards around you, but there are more than that. It is the remote hazards, be it in the form of glacier lakes, or just maybe there was a landslide and there is an induced lake. So how that, you don't see it apparently, but how that could create future risks for the community. The sustainable land or resource use is a key in here, and to start with is the habitat assessment and planning. There could be some solution with the mitigation, but then there are areas which I'll give you a few examples that the only solution could be relocation. And relocation is something which one community, one institution, or even the public institution won't be able to do it, alone. It's a shared responsibility. So then, being the Pakistan being the agriculture sector so dominant, so there is a way that climate smart and resilient solutions, especially in the agriculture sector, there is quite a lot of avenue to work with. The early warning system or the anticipatory action for the climate hazard is something my institution is, it has 2 decades of experience in this, and we try to understand the local issues, the risk, and then we try to come up with the solution. So based on the early warning system, how evacuation saves life. And then particularly from the risk mitigation or risk reduction part, here I take the opportunity to thank NDRMF, because for the last couple of years, in partnership with them, we are able to come up with retrofitting of certain schools or providing protective infrastructure to reduce the risk. And some of our own initiatives, like for avalanche protection, there are terracing, we have applied wooden tripods, or plantation, which is a key, because there are some species which is related to the local, soil stabilization. So selection of those is really a key in there. I'll be a bit quick on this, that how we can come from theory to practice, and what framework. This is, I would say, internationally recognized framework, that how we can shift the disaster risk, response to a centric approach, a community-centric approach to resilience. As we understand and identify hazards, that comes part of the preparedness, and how we can use the community-based disaster risk management model. And that's a very successful model for the community, be in a mountainous region or in a coastal area. When we talk about resiliency, of course, like planning plays a key role in there, and that is combining the scientific knowledge as well as the indigenous knowledge and how we can translate it into planning. We talked about the risk management model, and then of course, like we cannot eliminate the risk, but we can reduce the risk so that we can do through enhanced protection that we call the disaster mitigation infrastructure. At the same time, there are key adaptation, and that is really important. As we emphasize on participatory planning, be it using the modeling or forecasting mechanism, the participatory land use planning will be a key in the future and in the current scenario. Then as everyone has commitment for this emission reduction, how we can reduce our carbon footprint on ground, everybody should come the decarbonization plan, and that starts with energy audits. At my institutional level, we are committed as a AKDN to the net carbon zero by 2030. Then as I said about innovation, so talking about from home, I would say, so green building is a kind of, I would say, initiative, and then the nature-based solution, particularly not only the mountainous part, but I think the nature-based solution is a key in the coastal areas. And as we come together, it's not about only how we can, prepare for a better, a better response, or how we can enhance the resiliency, is through an innovative and impactful partnership. Not only, let's say, the resource part we talk about, it is changing the attitude of the people. It is talking about how we can share knowledge and how we can transfer skill. With that, I'll just give you a practical example from our area of work. So there was this incident of the glacial lake outburst flood in Batswat in 2018. So you could see from the pictures how that disaster became, not only, let's say, particular to that location, but downstream when it formed a lake. And then, there were so many houses upstream as well as downstream that become so much impacted. But there was no loss of life in that incident. Why I am emphasizing on that is maybe on a smaller scale, how the early warning system, it really plays a key role in the disaster preparedness or in the climate risk reduction aspect. And then, of course, like when it comes to, that's the pre-disaster thing. When it comes to during disaster, you take the whole approach of the humanitarian relief, and then there are certain early recovery aspects you try to, address, and everybody does. But in the mountainous region, there becomes another, challenge. That is when it is just, as currently I talk about the floods also, that we are just, there is this onset of the winter. So then, you need to take some extra precautionary, steps, and then people cannot live in tents. People don't have any other options to, they can live with hosts if there are extra, houses, but it is becoming a challenge in these areas and in everywhere. So to provide them, we used to call it shelter, but this time we are coming up with a lightweight prefab homes, and it is we kind of did the audit and run it through the model, and it really convinces us that it is a climate friendly or eco-friendly solution. And then we also take care of the insulation and thermal and ventilation inside the house. So this is another example of the high-risk village, and here I want to really emphasize that maybe mitigation or just constructing a protective wall won't be the solution. So this is an example from Chitral, a village called Grep. It has a history of several, disasters happening. You can see from the picture the, the devastation, and as we talk about the frequency, that it comes with the, with more of the impact there. So here again, there was no loss of life. And that was, as Farah mentioned, as part of the evacuation. People were already evacuated because they know about, okay, if this disaster is going to happen, where there are safer places where they could go. And with that, of course, like, can you show the next? So here, through an example, when we talk about, let's say, the maps, what does that mean? This is an example of the hazard vulnerability risk map. So the colorful, the red part are these streams on the map, and it shows red because it says high risk, and then the other color, the orange type, is a medium risk, and the yellow is the low risk. And then the green one is kind of relatively safe. Why I call it relatively safe is here in this map, it doesn't capture the seismic part of it. So you can clearly see these maps are like really good for your planning, really good for your response. So with that, there is another example from another village where how the protective walls can, reduce the risk. So I think with these stories, and as we talked about certain institutional, arrangement and this innovative partnership, we can clearly say when if we, join hands together, if we really work with the start, like with the planning to execution, and then share lessons learned, I think not only Pakistan, we can become a certain example for the world, because Pakistan is a unique geography. It has mountains, it has coastal area, and when you talk about the list of hazards, I think sometimes I call it house of hazards. So that really provides us an opportunity to work together and to bring climate smart solution for the world, I would say. With that, I would say thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nusrat, and thank you, Farah. I'm glad for the last couple of minutes or so much time, but we have seen a decent actually webinar go ahead with this one. We've tried, the IT team I think has played a very positive role in bringing us back to the original format of the webinar. Thank you so much. Though we've approached the time which was dedicated for this webinar session, I think it would be unjust if we do not open for question and answers. I mean, the way we can do it is that anybody who wants to comment or share any thoughts or questions can please raise the hand, and I'll be happy to moderate on that. I think a lot of points coming in from the three main presentations, actually, starting from the very basic Maruf Saab, then Sheikh Saab, and then from the Khan. So I'd like to open the floor for any questions, any comments from any participants of the webinars by sharing hands.
क्वेश्चन आते रहे थे जो लाइव रिस्पॉन्ड करते थे.
Questions मुझे निकालने पड़ेंगे.
किसी ने पूछा? Waiting.
GNICL.
एक कंट्रीब्यूशन ये करना चाहता हूँ कि ये जो we should work on increasing the penetration surely of insurance, as rightly pointed out, that penetration of insurance is very low as compared to the surrounding countries. And we are working with SCCP also, and we had a meeting in a gathering with the President of Pakistan also. There we also discussed we should increase the education levels of insurance, because unfortunately currently we don't have any specialized courses in any of the master's programs. So we should work on that. Plus, for the disaster related thing, there is a worldwide program available, which is parametric insurance to deal with the disasters. Defining the disasters, we can have a insurance arrangement which will be backed by the international reinsurance partners like Swiss Re. We have discussed with them that parametric insurance basically provides a fixed amount for disaster relief functions only, not the rehabilitation or reconstruction or anything. The initial amount which the government would need, for example, 100 million, 200 million dollars or something, to deal with the disaster as an initial expense, not going for the rehabilitation or reconstruction. So that type of product is available internationally. And being a federal-owned government insurance company, we can provide lead in that. For that, we'll discuss with the reinsurance market and seek what they want as information, for which we'll request NDMA to assist us in that. So that's one contribution we can make.
Thank you so much for that. I think one of the biggest topics of discussion right now, and one of the biggest things we need as well. Sheikh Saab also did mention something of similar nature, and I'm happy to share that the NDRMF is working on the DRF at a very fast pace. It's the disaster risk financing instruments we were working on in collaboration with other government partners and development parties as well. And not just focusing on insurance, which nevertheless remains one of the most important pillars of taking this chapter forward, but on other instruments as well. And the NDRMF has been there, the fund itself has been there for about 4 years now. And these discussions started some time back, actually, as part of the original mandate as well. And you see, the important part here is, if we have instruments like these, including insurance among others, matured at a stage where the country is hit because of its vulnerability by different disasters of different nature, at least the initial relief work can be done, which rightly pointed out by the participant and colleague from NICL. And I think that is one of the way forwards for us as well. And we've noted down that as well, and we would be taking this discussion bilaterally forward as well. Thank you.
I've shared my contact details in that. So I'll work with this, with the international reinsurance community. We have a conference in Singapore by end of this month. I'll be visiting there, and we're discussing with different reinsurance companies on that.
Perfect. Very well noted, Ji. And we'll be in touch, inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any points, comments, answers, questions from it's a bigger house we see.
Hello. Can I ask a question, please? I'm Usman Omani from Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund. My question is for Dr. Ali Sheikh. It's on early warning systems. I just wanted to know, to what extent, what are his comments on our existing early warning systems, and to what extent did it contribute to, or to what extent did it result in devastating floods, or to what extent it reduced the impact of devastating floods this time?
Sheikh Sahab, did you manage to get the question?
It's a very, thank you very much for this question, Usman. This is a difficult one. First thing for us to understand is that Pakistan is in the process of expanding its early warning system. It's not full capacity and it's not optimally utilized. जो भी capacity हमारे पास है,
Yes.
मगर जो biggest handicap है, वो ये है कि जी हमारा early warning system is geared towards riverine floods. And this time around, for the most part, we had is torrential rains. Karachi ki urban flooding was torrential rains. Balochistan ki jo runoff tha, that was torrential rains. जो standing flood Sakhar Khairpur mein hua, from the monsoon clouds that came from Rajasthan, that was torrential rain. In fact, while we were getting flooded and drowning, our Mangla Dam was not filled, and Trabela got filled much later. There's a small drought upstream in the catchment areas. So very soon we'll be hearing about water shortages in the country. So question to you is, I think a partial answer to your question is that we can and we need to strengthen our early warning system and communication with upstream countries such as India in this case. But as far as torrential rain prediction is concerned, PMD was off the mark by several 100%. While they did predict heavy rains in some areas, they did not grasp the standard. And what was, हालांकि हमारी जो short-term weather forecasting है वो बहुत improve हुई है पिछले चंद सालों में. Having said that, जो community level के ऊपर communication की जरूरत है, उसको strengthen करने की बहुत जरूरत है. I want to conclude.
जी unmute करें.
सब म्यूट हैं आप, kindly Ajit, we okay now?
Fortunately, 1,500 or so people died. Each human life is very precious. We don't want to see that, a single death. But compared to 3 million people, 30 million people who were affected, the fatalities were very small, which means that the early warning system to save lives and to evacuate at the community level was much stronger. Social capital was much stronger. The work by such organization as yours was much stronger to communicate in time and help people evacuate. And that's why loss of human life was relatively small. It is much smaller compared to the houses demolished. That only tells me that people were able to evacuate in time. Somebody must have told them. And that is the social capital at work, not the technology at work. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheikh Sahab. Uzma, I think you got the answer. Before going ahead, there's one comment actually I'd like to read. That's from Didar Kareem coming in. Is there any mechanism at NDMA or NDRMF for proactive approach at national level to identify hazards and risks throughout the country instead of reactive approach after a disaster event to respond in terms of relief and rehabilitation? 2-3 points, a couple of quick ones actually. One, risk maps were discussed, MHVRAs were discussed during the panel discussions today by participants. The multi-hazard vulnerability risk assessments actually. So basically ये वो tool है जो हमें ये बताता है कि हमें development climate resilient या disaster resilient development कहाँ पे और किस तरह करनी है, and what sort of disasters do we face when we're going ahead with development in a certain area in the country. So that's one thing. Second, we talked about the risk financing, because there is only a certain amount till which we can mitigate the risk, and beyond that, it has to be secured through insurance or risk financing mechanisms. As NDRMF, we're already working with Suparco, working on a national catastrophe model, coming up with a national model, so to say. And this is going to tell that, okay, what sort of hazards, what sort of quantity do we really face ahead? usually, as Sheikh Sab just mentioned in his comment as well, that we've been somewhat geared for the riverine flooding, and this time it was torrential rains, and now we see water in some part of the country, some part is still underwater, and then reports of droughts might just be coming in the near future. So I think the country is gearing up towards that. One of the discussions points today was regarding the Hydromet project. The NDRMF is financing the Hydromet project, raising capacities of the aviation and Met department for that matter as well. So gearing up on all different aspects actually towards working this. I see a hand raised by Director EPA AJK. G, over to you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Sir, in fact, it's a very good initiative, very wonderful presentation by the competent participants. My issue is actually just to raise the recent events as we are experiencing an historic flood in Pakistan, but in upstream region, particularly in AJK. So we have a very different situation that we had to face in the wake of recent cloud burst, particularly in an area which was at one time a non-monsoon region. That's the Neelam Valley. Neelam Valley region of the AJK was a non-monsoon region, in fact. But that very unprecedented situation that we had to face, and we have to experience this time, that back-to-back we received 3 cloud bursts in an area which was actually non-monsoon. So that's the repository. We consider it a repository of natural resources of the AJK, and we say that it's a jugular vein as far as natural resource endowment or natural resource repository is concerned. So at one end, at the second end, we have declared the whole Neelam Valley as a bioreserve. And I think third most important thing is that this very region actually serve as a water tower for the sustained yield, and this helps us to ensure the sustained yield in the rivers. And when you talk about the rivers, then hydrology and sustained yield of the water mainly depend on this region. So the state of environment report that we actually carried out in 2018 and 19. In 2018 and 19, that the state of environment that for the very first time we carried out with the help of IUCAID Pakistan, and it says on international reporting framework, that's the TPSIR, driving post-pressure impact response framework. And we observed that from 2000 to 2017, we have a substantial decrease in permanent ice cover. That reflects the climate change adverse impact on this very fragile region. And at the same time, in 2000, we were having 50 lakes, and now we are having more than 75 lakes. Lakes in terms of numbers and in terms of the space of the volume, has been increased. So these effects can be substantiated from the fact that recently we received 3 cloud bursts back to back. So I think the real issue we are lacking in, and you are going to formulate a strategy. There should be some general consideration for the region, which actually important in terms of natural resources, which actually important in terms of sustained yield in the Indus Basin. So very first thing that we actually we think that would be required very soon, just to have a proper response from the government side, that a proper database, a data transport, data gathering and data transport system, so that we may develop a proper response strategy. Unless we have a reliable data, unless we have a efficient transport, I think we will not be in a position to foresee or anticipate the situation. Is there any provision that the Met Department may be asked to expand its data gathering arrangements that it already is having in all over Pakistan and AJK, but some specific location, very few in number, particularly in northern side. So would there be any provision in this very strategy? And this must be considered as a very, very important thing and to be taken on a foremost basis. Unless we have access to the reliable data, unless we have proper measurement or gadget system, I think we can't anticipate particularly in this region which is already deprived of such thing. So my question, my submission would be to the fore and to the authorities currently engaged in the formulation of this very wonderful strategy. Please consider to the give due consideration to the region in terms of resource distribution, in terms of strategy expansion, in terms of any development intervention that you are going to take or you are going to suggest in an areas like AJK, which have a natural resource repository and which is ecologically very much important, and that we consider it the area which actually provide the substantive and very, very, very valuable ecosystem services to the people. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Ji. I think very valuable points, and I am not really sure if somebody has joined us from aviation or PMD, but still I can assure you that the project which the interventions within the project, which took a little time actually to start, to get the relevant approvals, cover a lot of area actually in terms of data collection, data interpretation, and then the syncing between different data. There are different interventions going on. Some are already under execution, and a bigger project is right across the corner being almost approved from all different sources, except that it might just get delayed because of the current flooding and the financing being routed to that. But yes, you're very right. Without the proper data collection and its interpretation, I think it becomes very vulnerable for us, no matter how much do we get prepared, but the vulnerability remains high. I see a hand from Dr. Shams Ali Beg Saab. Dr. Saab, you want to go ahead?
So first of all, thank you very much for the wonderful webinar series from NDRF First. I am actually the first one, I think, from academia participating in this webinar series. I think I could wish even there are many other from academia if these webinars are actually planned ahead, so they can even more participation from academia be possible. I have actually first comment on the presentations. First, the first presenter actually mentioned about the carbon dioxide emissions. He actually presented some data. Being in academia, we actually didn't find such type of data. First thing is how these data are credible and where the presenter actually got those data. And this is one of the comment. And the second thing is that the colleague from ACA mentioned one of the case of a recent Gulf event in Upper Chitral. This area is actually hit by this disasters a couple of time, maybe like since 2005. Now this area is continuously after some years hit by this Gulf event. And every time ACA is responding very well, keeping in view their needs. So after like these events and their responses, what actually they're doing new this year, because climate-induced disasters, the people are already migrated in some other areas, those targeted villages they are actually working. But how, like what new type of interventions they are actually doing this years in order to reduce the impacts or vulnerability of the community, whether they have the plan to settle them in the same places like where they are, or maybe they relocate them some other places, what actually they are planning, because they are the one who are responding in the particular area. And the third, I just would like to take this opportunity to tell you that in academia, actually, for the first time in Pakistan, we are in a process of introducing a climate change program, undergraduate program. We want even to use your platform to get the expertise from the practitioners, actually, who are there in the field with a lot of, data, informations, and field experiences that can help us, to design our courses and contents that can even help to build the future, manpower that can help, to cater this climate change related problem. So I would like to take this opportunity to say that maybe can we use the NDRMF platform to reach to those practitioners who are actually working in the field and can be helpful for us to even robust our, advance our this courses that we are in a process of developing. This is one of the important things that I would like to share. And maybe one suggestion is that maybe the NDRMF can, if they plan future webinars, maybe it's better to plan ahead of time. And this is actually, is a very busy schedule. If you are conducting webinars, and maybe on weekend and maybe on like evening time, be a better option that even you can get more participants, from academia even. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that. We've jotted down the comments or the suggestions you've made, especially in terms of time. I mean, different people joined from different time zones, but we can definitely look into that. You asked two different questions. One for Maruf Saab, who's the CEO of the SERP. I would like, Maruf, are you still with us or you've left the conversation?
We are still there.
All right. I think Maruf Saab, so we will, yes, I don't see him, right? So we will send him your comment as well, and we'll try to get back to you after he responds to us. Meanwhile, there was a comment for the Akhan, for Nusrat and Farah. Please go ahead in responding to the questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shams. I think it's before going to directly answering the question, there are two things I would like to highlight. Like academia in particular, they play a key role, and they have to work with other institutions, be it on a joint research or especially bringing youth to this to solve the solutions. Then there is another issue that especially climate change, it impacts the segment of the society, be it women, children, or elderly, differently. So when we go into practical solutions, we have to address certain issue. Coming to the particular question of relocation, I showed you a case where there are many areas where it is a pure case of relocation. Whatever you invest in that, the disaster is going to happen. You could quietly reduce the risk, but you cannot eliminate the risk. And relocation is a subject not only in our country, but in other parts of the world. It's such a challenging, I would say, subject. And of course, the government has a lead in this. It brings, policy measures. It brings so many investments needs to be done. So for this particular case, we visited together with the local authorities this village, and the solution was coming that if it is a relocation, then the government is providing a safer lane for them. Then we come in and whatever we can contribute and what others could contribute. That happens. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. The clock has already hit 1. If we do not have any more questions or comments, I personally feel we've had a very informative session, just like the other webinar series, and this being the last of the series. I'll take the opportunity of just reflecting a little bit, very brief. Obviously, I cannot really reflect in a true manner to the expertise and levels of our speakers today. I mean, the experience and the thoughts which they've shared, but it's a very humble reflection, actually. So the discussion from the very first presentation started, and I think it is very important for us to see, though the authorities and the concerned people working in the fields do take care of this, but the particular segment of access to clean water, how pregnant women can be treated, their responsibilities for treating them, and then how the particular example Marusab gave of when you hit fog, you slow down, you learn, and you learn fast so that you cope up to the situation in a safe manner. So all these things. And then the very important discussion for today, I think the game changer, I would rather say, the climate triggered disasters, the institutional responses and stuff. I think greater collaboration came under discussion between the NDMAs and the BDMAs, and how can you act better. And especially when there are mandates already assigned to departments on who has to do what in certain cases. I mean, disasters are not new to the country, and still we treat them as liabilities, as threats, as disasters actually. Whereas across the region, I mean, such floods and rains and all that have been started taking as assets. It will be very hard for us to see droughts, especially after so much of rain, because the channels are not really there. So very important point touched today, I think, for authorities to take care of is the no pre-allocation of resources. Once no pre-allocation of resources, and then connecting, I'd connect that to the absence of disaster risk financing instruments as well. So in the absence of both these cases, what actually happens in case of disasters, and what we're seeing currently as well as during the history of the country as well, that all development budget, all resilience budget, all budget which does not even have gap actually to be reallocated to other sides, is actually or has to be mandatorily be shifted to relief work. And following the relief, I mean, there are bigger challenges coming up. I mean, health issues, hygiene issues, development issues, reconstruction issues, and all that. So there has to be specific things. MHVR is, yes, Sheikh Sab did leave a question right there. Yes, NDMA has issued guidelines for MHVRs to be followed by the provinces or any agency which goes ahead, though the overarching role remains with NDMA, which they keep it, and they obviously are taking some time to complete that, because obviously completing MHVRs for the entire country is gonna take time. Very important development aspect on how the Kacha area, how the riverbeds are occupied by people and they are living there. It becomes very difficult from a safety, security point of view, from a recovery point of view, and then how do you actually compensate somebody who was already established at a point where maybe it was designed that whenever water comes, it is its passageway. And the phenomena of these lakes coming in and developing into sin and stuff is just because of the fact that the riverbeds are choked and there's no passage actually which leads to the sea, and the water is now stuck. Another very important aspect of building our capacities and resources, rather than just depending on accredited entities, development partners, which obviously play a very, very important role. Moving ahead, Pakistan up till now has only 2 entities accredited by the GCF, none from AF. GEF remains one of the other factors, which is through, again, access through different development partners, accredited entities. And as luck would have it, the 2 entities which the country has accredited from the GCF still are to bring in money. And in a recent development, I'm happy to share, in a very recent development, the NDRMF was given a go-ahead after we had requested some time back that we be allowed to access GCF for its accreditation. It takes about 2 to 3 years usually, but we are on its track among 2-3 other entities which will be applying for accreditation to the GCF. This might actually help access one of the funds among others, which Sheikh Saab did mention, including the SIF and ADB windows and stuff. They still remain untapped. Then there was different discussions on monsoons coming in areas which has never seen earlier, heat waves coming in. And another important aspect, we always go ahead with adaptation, whereas mitigation numbers are now becoming alarming. And the targets we've identified in the NDCs, the targets we've set for ourselves, the policies which are to actually help these targets to be met by 2030 and so on, after the stock take takes place the next year, I think mitigation is also something to be discussed at a very senior level, at a very important stage, and it's high time for us to start actions into mitigation as well. The numbers are alarming, which were shared, 170%, 300% emissions. I mean, emissions, and with all these numbers, mitigation cannot be ruled out. Rather, it is just a matter of time that it might just overtake adaptation in terms of its importance. Baseline data remain important factors. Risk transfers, I mean, it's a complete availability of 100%. I mean, we are yet to start actually. So it's very beginning. We're not even in the infancy, and it's high time that we move ahead. And then building partnerships and what entities like Khan are doing in the northern areas, in their own capacities, and learning from their own experience and replicating the same, improving their ahead. I mean, it is very important that we identify and we come up with partnerships which probably or maybe are specifics to the regions, because one entity working upstream in northern areas will have very different sort of a skill set, whereas another entity working downstream will have a different skill set required. Dealing with floods, torrential and riverine changes the entire game plan on how to interact, how to take care, how to tackle these challenges. And so building partnerships on these, building data sets on these, working on risk financing instruments, working on the climate triggered incidents, which are going to increase. So something which is beyond the hands of us, I think we should be working on how to cope up with that rather than waiting for a disaster to come up. I see a comment as well that Pakistan acts best in disasters, while the rest of the year, it's a very slow and unfortunate actually thing that we do not get ready for the disasters, for the disaster resilience, for the resilience building actually. With all these thoughts and comments and excellent presentations by the 4 speakers, I would like to say thank you to all the participants who've joined. A very thank you to the speakers who've shared so much of insights to all this. And thank you all for making this a very successful webinar series, one of the last. With this series, with these words, I thank you all. I wish you a very good day, and hope that NDRMF comes up with new series after this successful series of webinars. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz, and have a very good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.